Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. It's another Chad and Mel Movie Hour. We are back with, we're coming full circle with a Darren Aronofsky moment. We did The Fountain last year, which is one of my top 10 favorite films, possibly top 5. And we are back with Mother!
Do you have to, I was just gonna say, do you have to enunciate the exclamation mark?
I think we need to talk about the exclamation point in
Mother!
depth. Yes, I think you need to, it needs to be exclamatory.
Yes.
So yeah,
Well,
this is
the
one
whole
of
film is, for sure.
the what?
The whole film is, like an explosion, so it makes sense. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah, so this is one of Chad's, dare I say, favorite Aronofsky films.
Definitely. It's only behind, for me, it's only behind my favorite one of his. So this is my second favorite film of his.
Wait,
can you guess what my favorite Aronofsky film is?
I think it's Pi, right?
Yes. Did I tell you that already?
Probably, but I think it's
it. You know me.
Yeah, well, okay. Mine is The Fountain. Obviously, we've already discussed that ad nauseum. But yeah, it took us the better part of 6 months, but we're back to Aronofsky. We both just recently rewatched it, and we're going to get into what we feel is a masterpiece. And if you disagree,
you're wrong.
We'll pray for you. So cheers, let's get into it.
Certainly, I think I wouldn't say wrong, but I certainly would say that a lot of critics who should know better didn't understand the layered texture. They were very reactionary, and they just like took it in at face value, which is kind of surprising that so many critics seem to have done that, because, if anything, they're the ones that should be looking for subtext.
So we've talked about this in previous movie hours, the fact that to a certain extent, like the critics almost didn't know how to articulate like what they felt about this movie, albeit they felt really great things about it. But this movie was not marketed well. We've talked about this before, but Darren Aronofsky actually had a huge hand in the marketing of this movie, and he purposefully wanted to keep as much about this movie a secret as possible. He actually nixed all the pre-screens ahead of the film festivals. And when they finally did do screenings ahead of, I think it was the Toronto Film Festival and maybe Sundance, he told everybody that was entering the theater, you're about to attend a funeral. So he was really trying to set a tone. He was really trying to keep the plot a mystery, and it worked. But I think that mainstream audiences and audiences that are interested in art house or more films that are directed by your auteurs like Aronofsky, like we are, I still went into this movie and really was blindsided. I mean, how did you feel when you first saw it?
Oh, I totally felt that way, but I knew innately there was a lot more to it. I didn't understand it at first, but I just love any time that a film is like totally like a dream. Like this, the way that she lives, like her character goes through the film, is a lot like how any of us go through a dream. Because you're confronted with a lot of like fear and anxiety inducing situations that you don't quite understand, that don't quite make sense. It's just like a dream, and I'm just fascinated with dreams. And it's not often that we get to explore that type of a narrative. And I don't think that's like the main like takeaway from the film, but it's just something that I personally kept relating to, is that it's so dreamlike.
I think that that's a really important part of the movie, and he in interviews has even said the third act was designed to feel like her, which is Jennifer Lawrence's character, her fever dream, and it translates. And the more you watch this movie, which, I mean, it has incredible rewatchability, as do all of his films, the more dreamlike the entire movie becomes from the first shot to the last one.
What's the difference between a fever dream and a dream? Because why a fever dream? It's just like it's more like a dream or a nightmare. A fever dream is just more frenzied.
I don't know what the technical definition is. We can look it up, but my understanding of a fever dream is it's more frenzied, more visceral, and what's the word I want to use? Like more anxiety inducing.
It says, like technically it says vivid dreams you have when your body temperature is elevated. So I guess like a more intense dream than a normal dream.
Okay. Beautiful. That makes total sense.
I have very intense dreams that are very similar to this movie.
Do you?
I do. I have, and sometimes they scare the hell out of me. You don't ever have intense dreams like this?
No, I do. I'm messing with you. I was gonna say you should write them down and make a screenplay already.
I know.
Yeah, no, I mean I have fever dreams. I think we all do. But yeah, this film definitely translates that sensation to a cinematic experience, unlike unlike most films. And because it's shot from, behind Jennifer Lawrence's character's head for the majority of the film, or shot along, you have her POV for the majority of the film, and we'll get into like the structure of the set and all of that. But I mean, it's just from, I would say, early on into the first act, when man and woman appear at the door, like the anxiety and the tension that she's feeling, like translates, it like jumps off of the screen and infects the audience, and you're like stressed out, and it just keeps going. The tension just like comes to a climax in the third act, and it's extraordinary to be able to do that, no matter like what story you're telling, and he doesn't matter, in my opinion.
It's remarkably effective. I mean, it's rare to find a film this effective, actually, I think, and I love when films are this visceral and really put you in the driver's seat that way. I mean, you're right there with her, like feeling every bit of like WTF through the whole film.
Yeah, and speaking of WTF, I had seen every Aronofsky movie up until that point. Obviously, I was already a fan. I left my, and it's interesting because this movie he sold for $30 million. It was considered a, flop at the box office because it only made 7.5 its first weekend. I went to see it in the theater, and I was the only person in the theater, which was quite terrifying. But I say all of that to say that, this is a movie that, as much as I knew what Aronofsky, I thought I knew what Aronofsky felt like, and when I went into this movie, I left the movie, I should say, not knowing if I liked it or not. Like, I was so blindsided by the narrative and all of it that it took me at least 2 more viewings back in 2017 when the movie came out to decide if I even liked it or not, because I didn't know what I had just seen.
I think a lot of people had that experience. I liked it right away, but I didn't know if I would fully appreciate all of its levels until I understood them and explored them. But I definitely liked it right away.
So should we talk about how the movie opens and just get right into plot?
Sure.
I mean, the movie opens with a shot of a girl who's essentially burnt to a crisp, and you see this house that she's in that's been set on fire, and the CGI basically moves the fire in reverse such that you see the house go back to a state of normalcy, and it's perfect, and it's not burnt, and it's beautiful, and it pans to Jennifer Lawrence's character, her, in bed, and she wakes up, and then the movie starts. And you don't really know what to make of that scene until the very end of the movie and the final scene.
Right.
But I mean, you get
when it starts all over again.
Yeah, I mean, the movie's beautiful in terms of like this
it's
circular storytelling.
right. I love that. I
Or
love that. And
cyclical, I should say. Um,
exactly. In cyclical, just like the earth is cyclical in maybe extermination of life and then reset period and then life and then extermination, reset period, ice age, whatever you want to call it. Global
mhm.
warming is real and it's happening now,
It is.
but
And Darren
we're not
Aronofsky,
helping.
no, hashtag we are the virus. It's ironic that we're filming this while we're in quarantine.
It's so
Um,
apropos.
it is apropos. And it's interesting because Darren Aronofsky is not shy in his interviews about this movie, amongst its many allegories, being an allegory for the rape of Mother Earth.
Hmm.
And we'll get
And
into that a little bit on a more deeper level, but there's essentially four people in this movie. There's four characters. None of them have names. They are referred to as him, her, man, and woman. Well, there's six characters, the two sons, but nobody has a name. So when you're watching this movie for the first time, it is so dreamlike and it is so WTF. And I wanted to get your take on, what you think the kind of first act is about, and like what are the dynamics of the narrative.
right. Well, I was after the second time I watched it, after the first time I watched it, I wondered how it would play if you didn't have the girl on fire as the very first scene. You just
Mm,
had her waking up, because then it would be like so less assuming and less like loaded, and it would fool you even more. It
right.
does take away the cycle of it all. So I get why
That's a
he had
good.
I get why he felt to do it that way, but I think if you just, because other than that very first sequence of the house, like you said,
Yeah.
reverting from being in flames, like resetting itself or whatever, um, you have a very normal like first act, in the sense that you're
Right.
just on what you think you're on Earth with a husband and wife in their
Hmm.
house, on a normal day when they're just living their life. And you
Right.
don't realize that, of course, later we find out that Jennifer Lawrence's character represents Mother Earth, and the actor Javier, is that his name?
Javier
It,
Bardem. Yeah.
yeah, he's him, capital H. So he is basically God or creator in the film. And so, but it's really great how it kind of tricks you in the beginning. You think it's just a normal film. And I think a lot of people never get past that. They're just like,
Right.
I don't understand why all this is happening. And
Yeah.
it really, the house is like all of Earth, really. The house is Earth. And everyone that comes into the house is like a soul coming in and being born in Earth. And of course, it starts with God and Mother Earth, and then you have Adam and Eve, which are man and woman, and then you have when their kids show up, that's Cain and Abel, and it's remarkable. And then all of humanity coming in, and like the film showing us the ugliest parts of ourselves toward the end. But
Yeah.
speaking of that first act, I just love how thrown for a loop you are, especially if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, which I didn't know much about it when I first saw it, years ago or whatever.
Hmm.
So yeah, it does have that rewatchability, because the second time you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, so you look for a lot more and you spot a lot more, like allegorical references and
Yeah.
things just start clicking more, because the first time you're like, I don't know if that is it biblical, because it's not really, it's biblical, but it's not in a way at the same time. So, but this first act sets you up to just be on a normal day with these two people, and
Yeah.
she's restoring the house, and the only odd things are that first setup shot, and then when she gets close to the wall and experiences the heartbeat of the house, which
Yes.
shows you that she has this deep connection to this house, which she's painstakingly artistically restoring at a masterful level,
Yeah.
restoring the whole house for this guy,
Literal
her husband.
quality. Yeah. I
Yeah.
really like your point, or your question rather, of like, what if that first scene didn't was not the first scene, burnt
Right.
woman, fire in, happening in
I'm gonna
reverse.
go out on a limb and say we didn't need that first scene. That's just my opinion, but
I will say this about that. It's a really good question, and I'll argue for why I think it's important when we get to the final scene. But I also want to say that almost every time I've watched this movie, which is probably like maybe 6 or 7 times now, but especially
well,
the first or second time,
hmm
as like weird as that first scene was, and how much of a 180 the movie takes almost immediately after it,
right.
I think it's almost masterful on his part, because maybe this wasn't the case for anyone else, but for me, I completely forgot as I was watching that movie about that first scene until I see it repeated at the end, and then I'm like, ding, 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 ding,
But
because it's like an immediate right turn. It's like, look at this weird thing, and then boom, you're in a normal husband and wife
that's
house.
true. I did forget about it too. That's a good point. But if he would have started it with just her waking up, he actually ends it with someone waking up. So then it would
Right,
have been like her waking up in the beginning without that other stuff. And it would have ended with someone waking up, and you still would have totally got that
the full
full
circle.
circle effect.
I'll
I
allow it.
don't
I'll allow it.
know.
Yeah, let's talk about the
Either
house.
way, it's still great either way. But that's
It
just
is.
my. I think it's not right or wrong. It's just my own personal little like maybe what I would have seen differently. But
Then
everyone's gonna have their
then
own little.
it's most likely right. Um, you're almost never wrong. Let's
That's a
talk about,
huge compliment coming from you.
well,
It is.
listen, you are, you take me to church when it comes to cinema every day. Let's talk about the house in the first act a little bit more. Like, it is so disarming when you get even to the second act of the film, especially the third act, because the first act is such a like a red herring. It sets you up,
Right.
like, you think you know what you're gonna get, and then he doesn't just do a 180. He does, like, he jumps into the fourth dimension, spins around a couple times, takes the
Yes.
blindfold off, and he's like, "You figure it out." But to your point, the house, as spoiler alert, this movie's 3 years old. We're going to discuss the spoilers. It's an allegory for the Book of Genesis. It's an allegory for Mother Earth, yada yada yada. But the house itself, to Chad's point, is kind of Eden, if you will. Like, it's Mother Earth's home. Her being Jennifer Lawrence, she's constantly in a state of repairing the home and improving it, and she does it with such care and such passion. Um, and what's so cool about the house, and Darren Aronofsky and his cinematographer and set designer designed the house on purpose to be an octagon. And I didn't pay attention to the octagonality of the house, or the octagons within the house, until like my second or third viewing, when somebody pointed it out to me. But the entire house is comprised of octagons. It's not only
Right.
structurally an octagon, but octagons are like in the cabinets. The window panes are octagons. The tiles are octagons. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's in certain fabric
I
design.
missed that. I'm gonna have to look for that.
He apparently is a huge fan of like Victorian and Gothic era novels, and apparently there was a gentleman that was a phrenologist at the turn of the century who had a home built in the shape of an octagon, and Darren Aronofsky liked that. And it also created the maze effect that you get in the movie, where camera is
Right.
either behind J-Law or right at her side, and you're kind of just moving in these circles from rooms to rooms to rooms. Nothing ever breaks. You're just kind of moving.
Right.
You can start in the kitchen and end up in the kitchen in the same shot, and it's just really, really trippy. And from a technical perspective, I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult it would have been. Um, but I like the idea that this house is never finished. She's always working on it. She's always improving it. She loves it. She's protecting it. She clearly communes with it, and it's part of her, because every time she touches a surface, she can feel the house breathing. The audience gets to see like this heart type thing inside of the wall, like you mentioned, that's pulsing and beating.
Yeah.
And
Which at first is the only supernatural thing going on in the film. That's
but you
directly supernatural.
and there's one thing too that I want to say this about me is that like I was ashamed of myself after having come home from this movie and like then doing like the deep dives into the theories and like I was ashamed at how little I picked up on when I came out of the movie.
Right.
But
It tricks you though. Like it really sets you up to take it at face value. I don't know how.
and then when you see it for the second time, you're like, how did I miss that? Because
Yeah, I did the same thing.
one of the things though that did like jump out at me in the theater when I saw it for the first time was there's a scene in the very first couple of minutes of the movie where she opens the front door and is looking out of her house and it's just a huge green field and then trees and then the camera shifts and then you see the house from the trees and there's
Right.
literally nothing there.
I think I think that
no driveway, there's no
right.
path.
And I think all of that is like outer space and the house is Earth, because you were saying the house is Eden, but isn't his like office, his study is really Eden?
You're
and
correct.
That's where man and woman are trying to get and then are kicked out of, right?
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely correct. Yes.
Not to derail, but continue
No.
taking us through that second act.
No, you're absolutely right. But that was something I noticed when I first saw it. I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like there's nothing.
And I wanted to ask you about this because and this is right along with what you're saying. But so in that wide shot where you see the house from afar, if you look close, and I only spotted this on this viewing, that it's like a shot where you see at the bottom there's like steam coming off of the grass from like way far from the house close to you on the far shot.
Okay.
There's steam rising, like clearly like CG steam rising in the foreground.
Means what to you?
I don't know, but like it was done very intently. Like there is a reason for it.
Okay.
I just don't know what it is. But yeah, okay. And I just was like, oh, I bet a lot of people missed that because I don't know why I was looking at the lower frame of the screen.
Right.
But I just was looking there when they cut there, and then I noticed it right away, and I was like, that's got to mean something.
Well, to your point, if the house is Earth and the rest is space or the universe, then the steam might represent like new worlds being forged. I don't know, like it's farther away from like other elements of the galaxy being forged. I don't know.
That could be, definitely.
Throw in that and seeing if it sticks. And one of the things that also happens in the first act of the movie, actually in the first scene when you see that the burnt lady, you have a little bit of a voiceover moment where you hear him talk about, I don't know if he really says it in the beginning, he says it more in the end, but you see him pick up a huge diamond, like this size diamond, and hold in his hands like it's a prize, and he puts it up on like a little mantle, and then it cuts to again Jennifer Lawrence's character waking up, and we get into that in the first act of the movie when all of a sudden there's a knock at the door and Ed Harris shows up in all of his glory, and that is the moment that man, as he's referred to in the as a character, I mean, they're not referring to each other like this in the film, but in the dialogue and that screenplay
credits and all that.
From the moment he enters her house, and I'm saying her house purposefully and not their house, her life starts to unravel. Her life begins to come undone. Yeah. And the tension
and she's hurt by the invasion. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's everything in this
him not seeing it as an invasion and not considering her. Him is not considering her.
It's highly disrespectful.
Throughout, yeah.
Him as a husband, because at this point you still think this is a normal story, right? Like nothing supernatural's really happened yet. And you're like, who the fuck is this guy at the front door? And why is Javier Bardem like being so like distant towards her? Like borderline dismissive, towards his wife.
Right.
Like, what's going on here? She's Susie Homemaker, and he's, gets to be Mr. Writer. But
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to
He's
ask
a poet.
Yeah, he's referred to later on as such. But I wanted to ask you, in the first act, something actually does happen that's supernatural or esque. She tends to have these fits of like respiratory like discomfort, like almost like an anxiety attack is coming
Right.
on. She has to like brace herself and catch her breath. And you
What
see
is
her go
that?
into the restroom, and she has like this almost like apothecary case where she keeps her pigments for her paints for the actual wall.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very old fashioned. It's nothing, it's not like Home Depot pants. It's literally like turn of the century pigments. But there's a scene where she goes to her bathroom after she has one of these episodes, and she opens the medicine cabinet, and there's a very similar looking apothecary bottle, and she pours a yellow liquid into the glass, and you see it kind of swirl around psychedelically, and it's like a sedative or something. What do you think that's about?
That's a great question. That is, and I don't know.
Aronofsky
I don't
has
have a theory, but I'll,
tell us
I'll
here.
think on it.
Okay. Well, Aronofsky has said in literally every interview that that's the one thing in this movie he will never, ever, ever
Explain.
completely say what it is. He said, I'll take it to my grave. So it's completely up to the audience to decide what they think about it.
The only thing I could think is that it must be like well, it's clearly metaphorical, and so it must represent her coping mechanism with the fact that she's being raped, like as a land, as a entity, being dismissed, being overlooked, being unconsidered, those things that hurt. You then take medicine, so it's almost like her coping, but I don't know how a Mother Earth would cope,
what is the healing tonic that she would take
right.
when she's having an anxiety attack? So it's
Yeah,
I love it. I like how Man, who is played by Ed Harris, is an orthopedic surgeon. And I never really paid attention to that until today when I rewatched. And I'm like, okay, of all the things he could be, why an orthopedic surgeon? And to me, like, I had this, what came to mind was like, feet and treading and don't tread on me, and like this notion of just like man just exploiting the earth, like treading, like stomping.
right.
I don't know. Why orthopedics?
Which we have to do. Like, we can't live without creating some negative byproduct. Because we need resources to live, so we have to use them.
And it's how do we toe that line? And Aronofsky really reminds us in this movie that we're not doing a good job of much of anything. But you have Ed Harris who shows up out of nowhere. Him is very excited.
If you think him is God and her is Mother Nature, then it's interesting that when Man shows up, Mother Nature is like, what's the big deal? Like, why are you interested in this? And God is saying like, no, this is really interesting. This person is a doctor. This person is, let's invite them in. Let's like entertain this notion of man. And Mother Earth is like, looking at such a great vantage point that humanity is almost unimportant.
We're ants, less than ants.
Exactly. So she's confused why he's so enamored even. And she's like, we're doing just fine without man.
Exactly. And we will find out as we progress through the film that for the majority of for the first and second acts anyways, him is very much Old Testament God, the God of Abraham. He's very
yes, that's true.
He likes to smite people. He's very much fire and brimstone, and likes to be doted upon. And the Old Testament says,
I didn't get that. I did a little bit, but very little, because he's extremely kind, he's extremely forgiving in a lot of scenes.
To whom?
to almost everyone. Like, remember when he tells Mother, we have to forgive them when they
But
kill.
that's in the third act, and
Yeah,
he's
but even in the beginning, when she's upset, he still comes to her and calms her. He doesn't completely like. He never is like, you're unimportant to Mother. He never
no,
insults her directly. So he's
right.
always trying to like walk the line. And he's like, baby, it's going to be okay. So he is reassuring. He's not
Oh,
like fire and brimstone. And he's never like completely like killing people. He's always very harmonious with man and the different people that come around.
I thank you for
I
saying
don't
that.
know.
I misspoke. What I meant to say is, no, you're absolutely right.
Not trying to argue.
I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm looking at him and his character from having seen the whole movie. At this point,
Right.
he is all of those things. He's still distant towards her, but he's not mean, he's not cruel, he is very kind. He seems to be very entertaining and hospitable. But having seen the movie as much as we have, and having done all of our, Reddit rabbit holes and all of that, we know that he's representative at this point in the movie of the Old Testament God, which he's not fire and brimstone in the first and second acts of the movie, but the Old Testament God in general was a very different God than what we get in the New Testament.
Yes, I agree with you, but I've just seen a lot of reviews that turn him into one-dimensional angry God. And I think it's so much more complex than that. I don't think he's Old Testament God, but I think you get glimpses of Old Testament God in places. But I think the film is way more, like, I think it's way less, like, specific than that, if that makes sense. I agree.
Yeah.
Because some people, not you, but some people oversimplify it.
No, I mean, I have a tendency to do that with this movie too, because there's so many metaphors, and what's brilliant about it is that Aronofsky conflates and mixes a lot of metaphors. Because Jennifer Lawrence's her can be read as the Virgin Mother, because she does eventually give birth to a son. So there's all these overlaps of biblical allegory.
There's no Mother Earth in like Genesis, right? In the Bible. Like Earth is not given a spirit, right?
No.
So see, that's what makes it like part New Age to me and part biblical. It's never like fully in the biblical. And some people try and box it in there. And you're not doing that. No, but I'm saying I saw specifically on my rabbit holes some people being like, oh, it's straight down the line, just Bible. I'm like, no, it's not.
No, you're absolutely right.
And that does make it confusing, like you were saying, because he does give it this rich, like, expanded vocabulary, right? Where he's not just only biblical.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, rich expanded vocabulary. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting though, like how many things hit you over the head on your repeat viewings that you're like, how did I not get this when I saw this for the first time? Like when him is showing man his office, which is metaphor or allegorical for the Garden of Eden. It's where his diamond is kept. Nobody can touch diamond. It's his prized possession. It's where he does
and we don't know what that is at first until the end of the film.
But there's a line when him is showing man around, and man says, I've read your book so many times, its words have changed my life. And it's like, Bible, ding, 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 ding. Like, how did I know that? And then can we talk about Michelle Pfeiffer for a second?
Oh my God. I'm just like, I'm too excited.
I am getting excited
too.
First of all, slow me down.
I'm gonna like blow a gasket. I am obsessed with Michelle Pfeiffer. I love her to death. I was gonna say real quick before we go to her, when they're still in his capital H, his study office, they're told, man is told explicitly, like this diamond that he has, crystal, whatever it is very fragile and delicate. Like man is told this, and man takes it anyway and clumsily breaks it, right? And it's like,
But it's not man, it's
that
actually
gives you so much anxiety too, because you're like, he just told you to be
but
careful with it, but that's
yeah,
man.
but it's technically Eve who ends up dropping it. But yes,
Right, right, but they're both.
humankind. Yeah.
That's true. Well, what women committed
Well,
original
Eve,
sin, so
Eve is the OG
women are the
scapegoat.
evil sex, right? So
Yeah, I mean, Eve is the original scapegoat, and I mean, she
yeah,
still is. But yeah,
that's true. She does break it, but um, yeah, it's interesting because she's told, not to go in there, and she can't resist, and she runs in there like, oh, I just want to see, and and I
she's
think
such a
she's told that it's fragile too, or she's told something, she's warned
yeah,
about it as well,
yeah.
and she
So
still drops it.
so
It's like she
let's
can't help herself, yeah.
literally, yeah, almost.
And she
Um,
is one of my, I would say she's definitely in my top 10 favorite actors, maybe actresses, we'll say.
okay.
I mean, she's high up there. I
Wow.
mean, everything that she's done. It's not so much that she's been in my favorite movies, but she's so incredible in anything she does. Like, I just love her so much. Everything from when I was a kid and she was like the perfect Catwoman to like, her more nuanced roles. But
She
yeah.
is Selena Kyle. She was perfect in Dangerous Liaisons. She's having a
Yeah.
renaissance right now that I'm here for. Um,
She's
love.
beautiful in this film too. She's stunning.
But what's interesting is before Eve shows up at the door, we see a scene where Jennifer Lawrence's Her walks in on Man and him in the bathroom, and Man has been disrespectful to her in the house since the moment he's
Yes,
in the door with the
I love
cigarettes and
this
the whole
scene.
thing. And
Right.
there's even when Man first walks in the house, I didn't notice that until today's watch. He comes in and him is introducing him to her, and when she offers him tea, Ed Harris almost looks like scared and he refuses the tea.
Yes.
I was like, wait a second, like why is he scared of her? It was just like the way Ed Harris acts, that like 1.5 second
Right. Oh,
thing
it's
is
so
like,
good.
why is he scared? Why is he
I don't
scared?
know, but that is very deliberate for sure. I don't know. I mean, we'd have to ask Aronofsky, I guess, but maybe it's like the fear of nature, or fear of what you're getting yourself into,
I
or
like
fear of bigger things that you're dealing with, fear of, who knows.
because
But
she
when he's smoking, I definitely think that is like leads right to pollution,
right,
because
right, right.
man is told don't do it, man does it anyway. It's just like when man pollutes with smokestacks, or how the myriad of ways that we are polluting, knowing that it's bad for the environment, and we're still doing it. And it's just like him smoking in there, knowing that it's going to contaminate the house, which is earth, but doing it anyway. And
it leads to his own demise because he has a respiratory illness because he's
right.
smoking too much.
And Mother's the like epitome of a great hostess. Like, even though it's pissing her off and she hates it, she's still so like accommodating. Yeah, I mean, she's just like I think everyone, when they watch this, they want to be like even a lot tougher than she was. But
Yeah.
that's how Mother Earth is. She takes and she takes and she takes. You know?
You just
Crazy.
took me to church. All right. So, where did we leave off? I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
Oh shit! You were talking about
Eve.
yeah, you were talking about Michelle Pfeiffer and like how she was with Eve, and
I'm not even halfway through my notes. Okay. All right. So, okay. All right. Ready?
I'm strapped in.
Okay.
I'm ready for the ride.
So we know that Eve is instigating. We know that Her is begging him to kick them out of the house, and he simply won't. And we're not fully sure why at this point. Her finds a picture of him in their duffel bag, and we are told by him that Man is dying, and he wanted to quote meet him before he dies. So again, it's like hit me over the head. This is clearly a reference to God. Why didn't I get this? But there's this moment also when Jennifer Lawrence is showing Eve around the house, and Eve makes her a cocktail. It's a lemonade. And, you know, when I watched this, even on rewatches, I was like, okay, why is it lemons and not, oh, look at that. How perfect is that?
And this ain't no regular lemonade either.
Right, that's a homemade mama's recipe, just like Eve's.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, why is it lemons and not apples? And then I went down a Reddit rabbit hole, and apparently there are certain people, scholars of specifically Genesis, where did I put it in my notes? Where they believe that the original forbidden fruit represented in, there it is, Genesis wasn't actually an apple, but was something called an etrog or an etrog, etrog, which was a citrus fruit. So that would make sense why it was lemonade and not apple juice. So I thought that was interesting. You know, she asked him to keep them out. He says, quote unquote, and where will they go? But ultimately,
he cares for them. Like, to me, that's honorable because they're obnoxious, but they don't know any better, and he knows that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to me, I never saw him really as that villain for some reason, and I think that's a better example of it than what I was trying to make before.
I don't see him as a villain either, but I do see him as a fallible God and a fallible man, insofar that he's kind and hospitable and respectful and forgiving of man and woman, Adam and Eve. But when it comes to his wife, he's not ever, he never gives her what she needs.
Full respect, right.
So he's almost...
Right, but you could argue that she's disrespectful of all of humanity, because when they come along, she's like, we don't need them, we don't want them, they're ants, they're just a whatever.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Which
she's
maybe is right, but...
Yeah, she's having none of it.
You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know.
No, that's
I think that Old Testament God is a villain. So that's why I say that word villain, because a lot of people are villainizing his character in this, just like Old Testament God, which is like classic archetype villain.
No, I got you.
Anyway.
No, that makes... well, I mean, at this point, you know, I wrote in my notes, how must she feel? Because, you know, the intensity is ramped up already to 11 at this point, and you don't even realize it's going to get ramped up to 100. But, you know, just when you think you're at wit's end right alongside her, Cain and Abel fucking show up at the door, unannounced, uninvited, and then you have Adam and Eve's son, or man and woman's sons, get into this heated physical argument. They're destroying her house in the process, and then Cain ultimately kills Abel, as he does in the Bible, out of jealousy. You know, the biblical version is Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's firstborn sons. Cain being Abel being the eldest, and they both made sacrifices to God. God favored Abel's sacrifices over Cain's. Cain got jealous, killed his brother. You see this play out in her fucking foyer. Right. So yeah, she's rightfully fucking pissed. And instead of him comforting her, you know, he's caring for man and woman until Cain starts to attack her, and then he steps in and he's like, back off, bruh. But at the end of the day, he takes them to the ER. Where's this fucking ER, by the way? He takes them to the emergency room in outer space, and she's left.
That's a great point. Where did they go? Technically.
Where did they go? Where is this? What hospital are they at?
There must be something there too, like another rabbit hole to go down.
And I'm a huge Donald Gleason fan. I think he's just a fantastic actor, and he plays Cain in what short amount of time he has on screen so beautifully. And he feels slighted by his parents. That's why, and his brother. That's why he kills him. And there's this moment with Donald.
And yet again, it's like petty human drama, like which just
Petty,
keeps.
yes,
Yeah.
the original soap opera, right?
Yep.
There's this moment where Donald Gleason as Kane looks at, because he starts to attack her, and he's like, do you understand? Do you understand this is not my fault? I didn't do this. This is their fault. And he's referring to all three of them, mommy, daddy, and God.
Yeah.
And she's like, understand. You see Jennifer Lawrence, I mean, well, her acting, why she didn't get nominated and win, I don't know. But these tears just fall out of her eyeballs right when he grabs her face. And then
Right.
at a certain point, he comes back to collect his wallet, which I thought was a great touch. And he says, do you understand now? Because he's like, now you know what it's like to be alone. I mean, it's just.
Well,
I
there's an interesting dichotomy where the God character called him kind of is caring for, is very caring for the humanity, that like
yes.
the human race in the film, if you're looking at it that way, which we are. Whereas Mother has no regard for them. The only thing important to her is her relationship with God.
And to her house.
And to her house. But you could almost like, is that even, like, is that admirable? That that's all that matters to her? Do you know what I mean? I don't know. There's so many ways to like look at this.
It's a really, really fucking good question. I'm glad you're asking it. And like the feminist in me is just like, yeah, it's fucking admirable, but I'm trying not to be defensive because I know you're asking it objectively, but it's like,
right. Well, it's almost like saying that it's like saying that the earth doesn't really have a care for us just because we're on her. She's gonna have an ice age and wipe us all out and then be just fine, like people say. The earth will be just fine. You know, it will hurt and it will suck for the earth, what we're doing to it, but eventually the earth will be just fine and we'll be long gone. Whereas God is like very focused on us and interested in us in a different way, and in our worship of him. Like he's in the story, he very much is addicted to the adulation, and that's a part of it. Yeah.
And that's very much an Old Testament God character.
So it's like saying that we're irrelevant to the earth. We're irrelevant. I mean, even if we hurt it and hurt ourselves and get into petty wars, and
we are ultimately irrelevant to it. That doesn't diminish the importance of our existence in the great cosmic timeline, but I would say that, you know, wherever you fall on the spectrum of religion and faith and belief, you know, there's an argument to be made that God created man, and then there's a counter argument, which is man created God. Now, again, wherever you fall on that spectrum, either way, God is an anthropomorphized figure.
Right.
We refer to him as he, and he's personified, he's anthropomorphized. Gaia is Mother Earth is anthropomorphized because we call her mother, but she's not to the extent that God is. And I would also argue that God, whether you believe he created us or we created him, has an agenda, and that agenda is hopefully to be cared for and loved, or maybe it's you know, he created us and he fucked off. But Mother Earth does not have an agenda.
It's a totally different relationship, right?
Right. So that's why she seems like she doesn't give a fuck about people, but really, it's a moot point because she has no relationship, or relationship with humans because they exist in her house.
She's beyond that. Right.
I mean, that's how I read her.
I agree. I think that. Right. I agree. I think that she doesn't have a relationship with us, and that she's so much higher, like so much more. I feel like her energy in this film is so much more evolved than man, that man is almost irrelevant, the way we look at maybe an ant as somewhat irrelevant. So and it's a similar like difference there. Whereas God is like, now if we had created the ant, we would think very differently about the ant.
Right. Amen. Pun intended. And I would argue that she's much more evolved than the version of God that's portrayed in this movie as well, because the version of God that's portrayed in this movie is very vain. He's very much the tortured artist. He needs validation. He needs praise. He needs his followers, and that plays out. Yeah, he's very very human version of God. It's almost like the inverse. It's like a very humanized version. Literally, it is, because we're seeing it play out in Javier Bardem.
I mean, God is so humanized in religion, and I think that that's a telltale sign of God having been created by man, is that man is not very creative, and man made God in his own image. That's what I think. Yes. So this is driving that home.
All right. So we're kind of in the transition between the second and third act now. Like, mom's pissed. These people have been cast out of the Garden of Eden. Daddy has boarded up the doors to his study, but Adam and Eve are still in the house. Jennifer Lawrence walks in on them having sex, which is a little bit representative of maybe their original sin. I don't know. You leave that up to the audience. But, what happens next is, they all come back from this hospital, and all of a sudden, all of these people show up to console and grieve and mourn and basically have a wake for Abel, all uninvited. But of course, God is all about it. He's playing Mr. Host, and Jennifer Lawrence is sitting over here going like, what in the actual fuck is going on? There's people in her room. There's people all over her house. And there's these two people, these assholes that keep sitting on her sink. And she's like, don't sit on my sink. It's not finished. It's going to collapse. And they just like ignore her.
It's not braced.
Ignore her, get back up. And it's like the perfect fucking metaphor for us just not getting the message. Like, stop sitting and trampling on Mother Earth's fucking sink that she, got, put together herself, and eventually it collapses and it floods the house, which is allegory for the Great Flood. So here we go again. And she's just like fucking pissed. And at this point, the cinematography and the direction is amping up the fever dream-ness of this movie, because she's just like running through this octagonal set and the camera's just following her in a frenzy, and it's beautiful. What else? And also one of the things that struck me is she's seeing the way that her husband is behaving with all of his followers around and all of his sycophants. And you see Jennifer Lawrence stare at him, and it's just like, who are you? I don't know this man. And it's just so well acted. I love it. There's another moment of Michelle Pfeiffer she comes up to Jennifer Lawrence and she thanks her for her hospitality, but what she really says is, I wanted to thank you for your hospitality. Your husband's been so generous. It's like the ultimate slap in the face on top of all of the slaps in the face she's already had. I don't know. And she's left to clean up everything. And she even jokes to her husband after everyone leaves, I guess I'll clean up after the apocalypse. So, I mean, it's all like really on the nose once you like rewatch it. Yeah. She's running around, why won't they listen?
But what it's about so great how it works as just like how you would feel if your personal space was invaded. So a lot of moviegoers will just take it at that surface level. But like it ramps up your own anxiety because you can so relate to it. Like you're right there in her shoes.
It's unbelievable how they were able to do that, and at this point, like after everyone leaves, after this funeral wake service or whatever, you realize why they haven't had children, because Jennifer Lawrence as her screams at Javier Bardem's hand and says, why don't you ever fuck me? And it's like, oh shit, here we go. Here's another thing that I didn't know was coming. So like, we know what that means in the context of a normal relationship, but what does that mean in the context of God and Mother Earth? Like, she wants God. He finally does, and then she immediately the next morning wakes up and knows she's pregnant. And she is.
What did you think of that theory that I sent you where it said that he was protecting her because he knew the moment that they did have sex, that it was going to start that cycle because it keeps going over and over again. And he has the heart from the previous cycle. So he
Right.
knows that that kicks off the chain of events that kills her, and yet it's inevitable.
I think it's spot on. I think that's if you buy into that theory, if you subscribe to that theory, which I now do, it's much more easier to empathize with Javier Bardem's him or God in this scenario, but still that doesn't redeem his character in my eyes from all the other shit that all the
Right.
other ways he doesn't do right by her. But I think that's
Right.
really great, because if he is God, then he is all-knowing. He's done this an infinite amount of times before Jennifer Lawrence
Right.
and will do it an infinite number of times. So he knows.
So do you think that, like, he was always this way with her? All these things that are upsetting her, do you think he was always this way with her? Like, why is she with him if he's that way? Because she's always surprised by it. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like, it's like she's like, I can't believe he's acting this way. Well, is this different, or is her whole life only what we see when she wakes up? There's so many ways to, like, think about it.
That's a really great question. It's a big question. I think
she's choosing to be with him. I mean,
yeah, and I think for the purposes of, like, getting the movie and the narrative, like, out and just getting it done and told, we're with her for the length of time that she's with him, and, like, we're just. But I think there's, like, a naivete to her, because she is mother, she is pure, she is unsullied, untainted. So there is just, like, this unconditional doting love that she has for him, and it takes her a while to see him for what he truly is.
Right.
But
that's a great point.
I think if he is God with a capital G, then, and we know that he's been through this infinite iterations before, and probably infinite iterations after what we see as moviegoers, he does know how it's going to play out. But it gets into free will, and it gets into this whole other conversation. But I think because she is pure, she's virginal, she's Mother Earth, she's Gaia, she's goddess, which he refers to her as goddess when they're at the funeral celebration, or wake, sorry. I think she's naive for the first half of the film, and then she just, like, she sees him as being this vain messiah figure, tortured artist that needs validation, and really gets off on people praising him, and she's like, okay, I've got your number now. I mean, that's how I read it.
What else you got?
The first time he says that he loves her is the morning after they have sex and she wakes up pregnant, and they both know that she's pregnant. That's the one and only time, and the first time he says that he loves her the entire film. At which point she also throws her medicine away, that yellow whatever it is.
Oh, that's important to the meaning of the medicine, for sure.
Yeah, she throws it away. It's clearly harmful to a baby. And then he all of a sudden is able to write again. He hasn't been able to write the entire movie. All of a sudden,
it's harmful to a baby, or she doesn't need it anymore because he said, I love you.
Yes. I don't know.
Because now they're happy, because now, remember, she starts smiling. She looks in on him writing. She's so happy because they're at peace.
Yeah, she doesn't take her Valium anymore.
Take a Valium like a normal person.
You are right. Yeah, maybe
it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe it was, like, for anxiety, or those spells that she would have.
Yeah, like, that's the only time, except with prior to Man and Woman showing up, that, like, 2 minutes of film when she's pregnant before his followers show up is the only time that they're happy.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, spot on. But yeah, I mean, he's able to write again. He shows her what he's written, and we can assume it's the New Testament. She weeps as she reads it. And there's this interesting cut to while she's reading where you get that external shot of the house again, but you see the both of them holding hands in the field looking at the house, and it's burnt, it's on fire, and then it does what it did at the beginning of the movie where it reverses and it goes back to like being beautified and normal and whole and whatever. So I'm curious if like what you thought of that, if anything.
That
Like,
was at the very end of the movie?
no, it's while she's reading what he
Oh,
wrote.
what he wrote.
It's just it
So
to them in
it's
the
like
field.
he wrote, it's like he knows what's gonna happen because he keeps living it over and over again, and she like resets each time because that's
Right.
like the earth resetting, right?
Yeah.
Consciousness, and it dies a small death and comes back. Whereas he's ever present. So
Right.
he is sharing with her, okay, I'm now gonna document this like ultimate story of what's happening and like gift her the knowledge of like what is happening, because he basically shares with her the story of
Right.
what's happening to
Right.
the house. And
That makes that kind of crystallizes it for me for sure. And we should mention that when Cain killed Abel, blood was spilled and it created a
right,
gash in the floorboards, which leaks down into the basement where there's a furnace, but the gash looks like a gash. It looks like a vagina. And
yes,
when she
and
puts her
blood
hands
with
to it,
menstrual
yeah,
blood, yeah,
it
maybe,
it's representative of all of these things. And when they're experiencing that momentary period of bliss before his followers show up, the gash in the floor disappears, and then it reappears as soon as his followers show up and start the house starts bleeding again. And
right,
you all see when she touches the walls and you see the heart inside the house, it's starting to blacken and turn to
yeah,
ash as well.
yeah.
Um,
So they're slowly working on the house by being like a cancer to the house. It's just like a real house, but it's also earth. But in a real home, like you can strike a nice balance of like inhabitant to home ratio. But the
yeah,
more people that you bring in your house, the less, capability that that house is really going to be able, and that the people in the house are really going to get along and really it's going to
right.
sustain itself as a mini ecosystem. So
Oh,
it's just like Earth.
yes, that's so brilliant. That is so spot on. Well, we're in the third act now. All of his followers show up. I mean, thousands and thousands of people have invaded her house. They've turned it into a war zone. I mean,
Warzone. I was just thinking Warzone.
the third act
Read
is
my mind.
like a right turn into the fucking 12th dimension. You're in a different movie.
I
She
love it.
starts having contractions in the midst of all of these people, these followers showing up, thirsty and greedy and disgustingly hungry for
It's
God.
like the
And
population boom.
the population boom. So you have like the people like desperate for God, and then you also have the people raping Mother Earth happening simultaneously, and
Yeah.
God is getting off on it, and she's literally having contractions. And one of the brilliant things about this movie, direction wise and cinematography wise, is every time she has a contraction, the house shakes, and like you can hear the house, like she is the house. They are one and the same.
Connected. Yeah.
And so she ultimately goes up to the Garden of Eden and he gets her up there safely and she gives birth to a boy. So I wanted to know if you wanted to kind of like take us home with what happens once the baby's born.
Yes. Well, I just love all the imagery. Like I love how quickly it escalates in this act, and I love how you get a sense of this like long-term like populations rising and civilizations rising and falling, and this like expanse of time all happening really quickly in this microcosm like
Yeah.
of a metaphor for all of this like other stuff that's really being discussed in the film. But
Yeah.
yeah, the baby. I just think this is like the main point of contention for everyone with this film. People don't want to, in the words of a friend of mine who I talked about this film with this week, he's like, I don't know, I have to be in like a dead baby mood. So it was like a crude joke of like, I'm never in that mood, is I guess was the point. But it's not a real dead baby. It's like it's a metaphor, and if you look at actually how beautiful what the film is saying is, and how powerful and how right what this film is saying is,
Mhm.
you would get why it needed to kind of go there. And it
Yeah.
needed to say, it shows in that moment when the baby's ripped apart, which to me, it doesn't even really look super real anyway. It's just the point of it. But it's not unwatchable, that part.
I
I wouldn't
I
let it hold you back from seeing the film, but it definitely it goes there to the darkest part of humanity. Humanity has a really dark has a has a depth of darkness, and we went all the way to the bottom of that depth. And in
Mhm.
order to do it, that's the way it was done in the film.
Agreed. I think
Yeah.
that it needed. I mean, even I was taken aback, not so much by like, it's interesting.
If my friend sees this, he's gonna kill me for saying. I
I
won't
mean,
let him watch this.
it would be interesting to have this discussion like with a larger table of people who have different opinions, because our opinions tend to align. But, in the
Yeah.
third, you have all of humanity just in all of our disgusting parasitic, if you will, Parasite Movie
Right.
Hour Saturday, in all of our parasitic just
Cancerous.
cancerous, beautiful, thank you, just feeding off of the both of them. And
Growing and feeding and absorbing resources and
left
covering the land with pavement, and yeah, just like
and,
growing and spreading, and
and
what
God
we do.
is, it's our MO. And God, he just had his baby boy and he wants to show it off
And
because
she's
his
like,
child
hell
is
no.
it. And Mama's like, no, you're not going to take the baby from me. And he ultimately does. And as soon
And
as he
you're
does,
right there on her side. It's important the
you're,
audience is on her side, because
yes,
he's saying, let's be on Mother Earth's side in real life. So he's
right.
putting you on her side at each step in the film as well.
And also, it's brilliant because the third act is the most surrealistic, but it's also the most viscerally realistic from the point of view of a woman slash mother, or anyone that can empathize with a woman slash mother, which could be anybody. But when you see Jennifer Lawrence's perspective as she's trying to fight her way through a mob of people, and her baby is being like passed through the crowd,
Right.
and all of a sudden, she's screaming and she's doing some of the best acting of her life. She's like, you're hurting him, you're hurting him, you're going to kill him. And all of a sudden you hear the baby's neck break. To me, that was more upsetting than them ripping it apart, because that's
Right.
unrealistic. But when you hear the neck crack, it's just like your
Yeah.
heart breaks for
Right.
her. And it's
Yeah.
just, and the movie is unrelenting because you're in the third act, you are already at level 100. Her baby's dead, she's realizing it, she's surrounded by a mob of people, her husband's nowhere to be fucking found, and all of these people are eating the parts of her dead baby, and she's
Right.
pulling. There's a scene where Jennifer Lawrence is pulling the pieces of like her dead baby's body
Yeah.
parts
Away
out of
from people.
people's hands. And then she gets kicked to the ground. They strip her of her clothes. They call her pig, cunt, bitch, slut, and they
Mm-hmm.
just beat her to death. Well, not
Yeah.
to death, beat her. And to me, that was the most upsetting thing of the movie, because that
Yes.
was realistic, not a baby being torn apart.
Yeah.
But
And that is what we are doing to the earth.
yes. And it's interesting because people are so, like, to your point, like, I can't watch this movie because the baby gets torn apart. Let me read you where the reference comes from that in the Bible. It's from Kings chapter 2, verse 6. Kings chapter 6, verse 29. And it says, so we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, give up your son so we may eat him, but she had hidden him. So it's a direct reference to the New
Yeah.
Testament. And it's like, don't get
It's like
upset
it's like
if you
in
don't want to
Clockwork
look at your
Orange.
own shit. Like,
Right.
if I don't care if you're a Christian or not, whatever, like,
Right.
if that's going to upset you, like, ask, the movie is demanding that you ask yourself, why are you so
Right.
upset?
Like, yeah, let yourself to be challenged by a film. Like, heaven forbid. Heaven forbid I'm outside of my comfort zone for one fucking second.
Honestly.
God damn it.
I will give you $20 to make me feel uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't know why people are not as smart as me. I don't know.
I don't either.
I just alienated my whole audience. It's fine.
No, but I was just thinking of the film Clockwork Orange real quick, because that film also is like, here's they give you the most violent character, which is the street hoodlum, the main character, Alex, and he goes to jail and becomes fascinated and in love with the Bible because he realizes how violent it is. And that's like that movie saying, like, oh, this awful street hoodlum is really attracted to this Bible because of the shit in it. But anyway.
And why is that?
Yeah.
I guess let's just wrap this up because I could go on for another hour. Let's talk about like the final scene of the movie. I mean, there's so many references within references on top of the metaphors in this movie, but we come full circle in the third act of this movie to that opening scene where we saw a girl who's not Jennifer Lawrence burnt to a crisp in a burnt house, and we see that in a desperate attempt to get everyone out of her house, and she delivers this epic line where she says, "Get the fuck out of my house." At the
which you're wanting her to say so bad through the whole film.
She finally fights back, and she finally like uses her voice quite literally. And she ironically uses Ed Harris's or Adam's Zippo lighter, which he was using to smoke cigarettes in her house earlier in the movie, to light this fire, which I thought was a beautiful full circle moment, and I hadn't noticed until this watch.
Definitely.
But she basically like sets the earth on fire and wipes clean the earth and says, "Not today, Satan." And all of a sudden, to Javier Bardem, totally fine, carrying her burnt corpse in his arms. And she said, this is some of the best dialogue ever. She looks up at him and she says, I can't, I'm so excited. She says, "You never loved me. You just loved how much I loved you. Mm-hmm. I gave you everything and you gave it all away." Now take everything away from this movie that's supernatural, biblical, allegorical. That is like something that every woman that's been heartbroken has said in some form or fashion in her life. Mm-hmm. And men too. But as a woman, when she said those words, I was just like, you're speaking my truth.
Yeah, and it also could be, it also works on the level of like Mother Earth speaking directly to us, like in this moment. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Of what we've done to her and what we're doing to her.
What we continue to do. Yeah. And he looks down at her and she asks, what are you? And he responds with the very biblical answer, "I am I." And she asks him where he's taking her, and he says, "To the beginning." So there we go with our full circle moment. But she says, "What are you?" She realizes she never knew who this man was that she loved. He says, "I'm I, and you were home," is what he replies to her.
And Jennifer Lawrence said that this was like the ultimate feminist role for her in a really positive way. And it's so interesting to me that you are so like, that it hits that for you so well, because it was written and directed by a guy. And we've talked about this before, like when a guy can like write for a woman really well. Well, this is not only like a guy that can write for women, but like a guy that wrote like this amazing feminist masterpiece.
And he did. And it's not in your face, preachy feminism. And she speaks to that in that interview she shared with me, where it's not like we don't need an all women cast and it doesn't need to be X, Y, and Z to have this feminist truth.
She's like the ultimate feminine energy in the film as Mother Earth. I mean, you can't get more.
Aronofsky, going back to Black Swan, to Requiem, to The Fountain, he writes women beautifully, in my opinion. He gets it. He gets everything. And at the end, she delivers another line that just like breaks my heart when she says I mean, she's literally a burnt corpse at this point. And she looks up at him and she says, again, something that's a universal truth for a lot of women. What hurts me the most is that I wasn't enough. But that also plays on the Mother Earth level, because she's not enough. We want more, 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 more. And he responds as God and says, it's not your fault. Nothing is ever enough. I couldn't create if it was.
Yeah.
Right? Like, take
Brilliant.
church.
I love hearing about how he wrote it in a frenzy, and it was like part essay, part novel, part screenplay, because he was trying to like get all of this scenario and all this like luscious depth of like knowledge and information out, so that that makes total sense with that hybrid of a like frenzied like outpouring.
Absolutely. And then, it closes out with Javier Bardem as God saying, nothing is ever enough again. It can't be if I have to create, and that's what I am, that's what I do. And then he closes out by saying, I must do it all again. So there we are. He has to do the cycle of life, death, and rebirth.
It's like he didn't learn. It's like he's not learning too.
He's not. And I think this is a good argument for man created God rather than God created man, because
God is so
if
man-like.
Created in our image, he's obviously a stubborn prick.
Yes.
And this is, what you brought up earlier, which is when, she's given literally everything she has to give. She even says, verbatim, she says, I have given you everything. And that's actually a verbatim line from Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree. But he says, I need one last thing, your love. And she gives him her heart, her love, which is now the gash in her chest. And he puts his hands in her and he pulls out her dead heart. It turns to ash and then becomes the diamond. And we begin again with a new one.
And then you realize why the previous diamond was so precious to him, because he's completely devastated when it's broken. Mm-hmm. I mean, with an anger devastation. And it's because that was a previous love. That was a previous like woman that he loved, Mother Earth experience. So it was all he had from her. So he placed it on a pedestal.
But it's also in that final scene when her heart turns to ash, but then is solidified into the new diamond. There's just it cuts to him like with this cryptic laugh, and you don't know if it's diabolical, you don't know if it's pure joy. It's really cryptic and Mona Lisa like and beautiful, but and open-ended. But it's also like all of these iterations, to me, not to go full feminist, is like God, male, female, whatever, but God can just wipe the slate clean and start over again. There's no real consequences for God. And for this man in this movie, for God in this movie, portrayed by a male, there's no consequences, because no matter how much he fucks up, he can just rely on this woman, Mother Earth, to give everything, and he can just exploit that and start all over again ad infinitum.
The police are coming for you because you're giving too much truth.
It's too truthy in here, I know. They can't tolerate it. They're coming to take me to the cosmic jail next to the cosmic emergency room.
Right.
No, I really tried to, especially on this watch, to like pause my like 2020 Time's Up feminism girl power lens, but it's also like you can read the biblical allegory, you can read the feminist allegory, and you can also read like the tortured artist, the foibles of fame and celebrity allegory. I mean, it's just
that's what makes it so great.
It's a perfect fucking film.
That's what makes it a masterpiece. It makes it so rich and layered, is that, and that's what people are missing, I think, when they try to box it in as only biblical or only New Age spiritual or only this or only that. It's
Right.
really this like layered thing that balances all those layers like really well. So definitely.
I know you want to talk about the movie poster, and maybe you can close us out on that.
Yeah, and feels like a lot is on the line for them to market it a certain way so that it makes a certain amount of money. But this film, so there's a couple different like posters for this film. There's like a more close-up one where it's you just sort of see her face, which is beautiful and everything. But there's a fantastic one that's more zoomed out where like you can see that she's taken her heart out. It's this beautiful like biblical, like gorgeous, like just.
It's very Renaissance too.
It is. It's very Renaissance. It's very like she has a very like Zoftic, like soft figure and vibe and energy. And just it's beautiful. It's just stunningly beautiful. And the way she's holding her heart out, it's just that touch of like being graphic that is just like encapsulates like this movie perfectly without showing you everything. It's just like it's so great. So I just wanted to give kudos for that. And I think sometimes they use like the more close-up one because it's less like controversial. So maybe more people will like see the movie or stream it or whatever. Yeah. But I really like where she's holding the heart out. Like that, I think.
In that wider shot poster, the hole in her chest is the vaginal vesta pipe gash that mirrors the gash in the floor of the house, which is
right. And Bjork did an amazing. The artist. Yes, and the artist Bjork did this incredible take on that before this film came out. But
so right.
But for one of her albums where she's like full on has the vagina chest, and it's like an amazing thing.
I love a vagina chest.
Yeah, but very very cool imagery, and it fits like the film perfectly. And I just wanted to give that film kudos for that.
I'm glad you brought up the poster art because that kind of takes us full circle to the beginning of the conversation of most of our reviews and deep dives is, like how is a thing marketed versus like how is it received and
what the true spirit of it is.
Right. Is that good or bad? Like who does that serve? And I think, as poorly as this movie did in the box office, we know it did great critically. And we know that
it did not do great critically. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. Yeah, even if you just go on like Wikipedia, you'll find a lot of really high profile reviews that like eviscerate this film. Like it's really mixed. It's really mixed.
Yeah. I knew polarized to a degree, but I've always been under the impression for everything I've read that like critics really, really, really appreciated it.
That's what you would think but no, that's not the way it was. And I was reading a lot about that because that really shocks me too. But because you would think that like movie-going audiences wouldn't get it and critics would, and it was a little bit backwards from that. It was like a little bit the other way around. But I think it even was nominated for the Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Actress and Worst Supporting Actor and Worst Director.
That's absurd.
Which is totally absurd. And it really speaks to like the people that just don't get it.
God damn it. Like we're trying to help y'all like watch this movie and watch it a second time.
Right.
And really just suspend your disbelief, but also like sometimes you have to like work a little bit, and not everything is, Avengers Endgame.
Right.
Nothing against, I love my Avengers Endgame. Seen it 2 dozen times.
Mm-hmm.
But
so
there's nothing wrong with working for your art. Like it should.
What was that review where you were saying that we did recently where you were saying this asks a lot of the audience? What film was that?
I think I said that a couple times. I know I said it for Snowpiercer, but I think I also said it about Midsummer.
Yeah, where you're saying like this. So this film even more so, I think, definitely asks a lot. but it's so rich and it gives so much too. Like if you really go there with it.
Even asked a lot of Aronofsky fans. Like I was saying, like even myself, like I had to watch it a couple times to decide like if how I felt about it.
The film received both boos and a standing ovation during its premiere at the Venice Film Festival, which, if you know the director, right? So, which, if you know the director, probably both pleased him because he's just after, sparking that thing that magically that art can spark, which is what the greatest thing about human created art is. The film is at like in the 60 percentile on Rotten Tomatoes, 69%.
Pretty good. Better than I had expected for RT.
It says, so listen to this. I had a couple I just wanted to highlight real quick if I could.
Hit me.
I'm still getting to it if you want to say anything else while I'm getting to it.
So what I wanted, what I'll say while you're looking at the reviews is, you can read this movie on multiple levels, and you should. I think Aronofsky's brilliance is that he, when it comes to the marketing of this film, going back to your points on the movie poster, is he was very hands-on in how this movie was marketed. Again, there will not be any pre-screenings. I don't want to give anything away. He was very purposeful about how this was presented before anyone stepped foot into the theater, and I think that's why even his own fans were like, what is this? Myself, but that's, I think, part of his brilliance, and I wish
that's what's so exciting too about film. Like a film like this is exciting for that reason, that you can go down a rabbit hole and that you can have repeat watchability.
And I so wish more, and I know we both will, I'm assuming you'll agree with me on this because we talked about this before. I wish so many more filmmakers would have the ability to do this. He's obviously got clout and credibility, so he's not like new to the scene.
Right. Like,
but I wish more auteurs, more small independent filmmakers could have more of a say-so in how their films are marketed and portrayed, such that when you go into something like Hereditary or The Witch or To the Lighthouse or any of these,
I was just gonna say that,
that you don't go in expecting popcorn, that they set
and that these artists and these artists often aren't able to make that what they really want to make because they're forced into the box of creating something that's more marketable, more palatable, more sellable in this like dumb culture we're in. But listen to this. So the New York Observer, which is no small change, gave this film 0 stars, 0, and wrote a scathing review saying nothing. They say nothing about Mother makes one lick of sense. Aronofsky's corny vision of madness turns more hilarious than scary. With so much crap around to clog the drain, I hesitate to label it worst movie of the year when worst movie of the century fits better. Talk about like he didn't get it.
First of all, 0 stars means like you didn't even watch the movie. Okay. Secondly,
it means you have like it's personal is what it means.
Did he not see The Island of Dr. Moreau? That was the worst movie of the fucking century.
Oh, yeah. Well, his name is Rex Reed, so we can shame him properly.
Oh, Rick. Oh.
Rex. R-E-X.
Rex. Of course. What a douche name. Yeah. Okay, Rex.
Right. And that's like the New York Observer, so I was a little shocked. And then it says that he also further dismissed other critics' positive reviews as equally pretentious as the film, and even nuttier than the film itself. They insist Mother is a metaphor for something, although they are not quite sure what it is.
I'm pretty sure they know exactly what the fuck.
So, in the New York Republic, Josephine Livingston stated that the film had, quote, no human center to hold it down.
I'm sorry, did she just not see Jennifer Lawrence in this movie at all?
The ultimate human center, the ultimate, like, feminine human energy. I mean,
was neither nominated for anything substantial. I mean, fuck,
right.
I probably wouldn't have won regardless, but the fact that performance did not garner her a major nomination is an affront to God.
Well, and then Anthony Lane in his New Yorker review wrote, "My patience was tested beyond repair." This is the New Yorker magazine. He said, "I'm afraid that my patience was tested beyond repair by the nimbus of nonsense of this film."
Anthony, don't throw words around like nimbus when you
now listen to this. The Wall Street Journal said, lest you doubt that what I'm saying about this film having bad reviews. The Wall Street Journal says it achieves a level of excess that makes the whole enterprise increasingly cartoonish rather than only awful.
Okay, hang on. I want to say but hang on.
Flabbergasted.
I will say this about that. When I first saw it in the theater and we were in the third act and you see Kristen Wiig portraying the Herald.
We didn't even mention Kristen Wiig.
Didn't, but we are now. Right. But when she's straight up like executing motherfuckers in the house, I was taken out of the movie, and it took me a while. Like it took me like 2 or 3 watches to like
realize what was being said, right?
Like the comedic genius of that. But the first time I saw it, I was just like, hang on, what is this tomfoolery? Like, what's going on?
Right. Chicago Sun-Times gave it a negative review. I mean, it goes on and on. So it got a surprisingly large amount of negative reviews.
Well, Rex and Anthony and Josephine can talk about it.
Goes on and on. Yeah. I mean, their reviews read like that they just didn't get it.
That they also only saw it once, too.
Yes, that's a great point.
Because
but even upon you and I only seeing it once, we knew, hey, maybe this warrants another watch.
Right. Yeah.
It's clearly a layered work. I mean,
you can't rush to judgment on this one
unless a work like this would not have been made for no reason. Right. I mean, especially from a director who has a proven history. Right. He wasn't going to put this effort in on something for no reason. So why wouldn't you look a little further? The more you look, the more it makes sense, really.
And it also tracks in the trajectory of his entire filmography because he's been exploring religion since Pi. I mean,
listen to this. David Edelstein of New York Magazine shrugged off the film in any talk of its craft, writing, "Most of the dialogue and effects are clunky, repetitive, and second-rate."
Okay. I'll take issue with that. First of all, no. Yeah. Second of all, these people that
How is the dialogue clunky?
The dialogue is in no way, shape, or form clunky. The cinematography is masterful.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally, like, most of the shots are like one-take shots where they're just like moving in a circle around the octagonal house. But right. These assholes, like, what he was from the New Yorker. Who was the other guy from the whatever that said it was pretentious?
New York Observer was Rex Reed.
Okay.
The New Republic was Josephine Livingston.
But these are some of like the more pretentious like publications. So like, calm down.
All the more reason that they should get it. I know, right? Calling someone else pretentious.
Yes, calling the kettle black right here.
Right.
No.
I mean, they clearly were up against the deadline and needed to write a film review, but no, you didn't get it. You didn't take the time.
We're here to set the record straight. That's what we do.
Bitch.
Yeah. We're here to alienate audiences and tell everybody that we're right.
That's right.
That's right. All right. Any closing thoughts on Mother?
No, but
the only other thing I want to say is that, like, I think it's an abomination that Jennifer Lawrence did not get more recognition for her performance in this, because it's sublime. But also I think that this movie, every time I watch it, and I think today was the 6th or 7th time I'd seen it, I catch multiple new things, and that is like
that's so rewarding as a
probably $15 for this movie in the theater, and it's 3 years later and I'm still getting rewarded from that $15. Like,
right. I would take us through the positive reviews, but they are expressing everything we've said. So
yeah, we are the positive. People need to listen to us, somebody else. Yeah, I love this movie. I love that you love it.
I love when a film like this is able to have a theatrical release, because it doesn't confine to that format of like narrative of like actually being like a popcorn film and just selling tickets, and which is what is pushed by the non-creatives that head like all the studios, of course. So often we talked about how directors like this have to prove themselves and then they get to make a movie like this. Just like The Lighthouse, I feel like The Mother was like a little more commercial, and then The Lighthouse is full on batshit crazy. For what's his name?
You mean The Witch? You mean The Witch versus
The Witch.
The Lighthouse?
Yeah. The Witch. What's his name again? The director?
I don't remember, but yeah.
Right. This is Aronofsky's like chance to. I mean, he's always done really out there stuff, experimental stuff, but I feel like this is like a full on like, let's do like a piece of work that's like really a statement and like a really well crafted vision, basically, which you don't get, you're not allowed to do by the Hollywood system until you've sort of proven yourself, and then they finally back the fuck off long enough to like really kind of let you work your magic, which is a shame, because that's what we want out of these people, is their magic.
And I would argue that if you are a fan of Aronofsky and have seen his body of work, that this is not the most avant-garde of his movies. I would argue that Pi and The Fountain are like more avant-garde, and I would argue that The Fountain.
Think so?
I'm going to qualify that. I'm going to qualify it. I think that they're both more avant-garde because they have even headier philosophical and metaphysical themes. I think this gets what do you call it?
This is more confrontational though.
It gets put into the category of like, this is just a crazy fucking movie because a baby gets torn apart. I think they're conflating violence. Yeah, I think this movie, if you actually like watch it at least 2 times, I know that's a lot to ask, but if you watch it twice and you get that it's really they're actually quite literally holding your hand and hitting you over the head and telling you, hey, this is about Genesis.
And you named it a bunch of times in terms of those points.
Like, you can really go down rabbit holes with the Pi and Fountain and The Fountain.
Yeah.
That's just my thoughts. Definitely. But you break a new word and everybody loses their mind.
Now that you've quantified or qualified those statements, I'm 100% in agreement. And I didn't doubt you for a second. But I just think like the immediacy of like the visceralness and the intensity hits you way harder on this film as a moviegoer in the present sense.
Agreed.
So definitely.
I concur.
And I think that definitely gets in the way, unfortunately, because this is such a great film. But that, I think it's perfect the way it's done. I mean, what more can we say?
We can say that our opinions are the best.
I had potential.
What? Wait,
Shamika said I had potential.
Shamika said I had potential. I think that what we can say is that our opinions are the best opinions and the rightest opinions. And I think what we can say in all seriousness is that you should give this movie 2 watches. This movie needs 2 watches.
Yeah. And
If you
it's
give it
good. It's good to go into it without having maybe seen this, but that's okay. Hopefully you've already seen it, but like it's good to like go down the rabbit hole after you've watched it and then go back and rewatch it and catch all the things.
So if you have seen it and you watched this, watch it a second time, and then watch this again.
Then you're right on track. And then just
Then
repeat, rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat. No, but I think it's a movie that does, even for me, I'd like to consider myself somewhat of a sophisticated moviegoer. I had to watch this movie several times to really appreciate it, and like I said earlier,
definitely
to decide if I liked it. And not everyone wants to work that hard, and I can appreciate that, but also like
I knew I liked it.
It's kind of fun to work hard, you know.
I knew I liked it. I just didn't know why yet. I was like, I need to know why I like it.
There you go. That's gonna be the sub title of this Mel Movie Hour. I knew I liked it. I just didn't know why.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think
that was
just like
good.
Darren did, you know, we beat you over the head with it. So if you're not gonna see it now, you'll never see it. But we invite you to subscribe. We invite you to give the video a thumbs up.
Comment your thoughts below.
Please. If you disagree, especially if you disagree, like opposing viewpoints are only going to make this better. And stay tuned because we've got the deep dive into Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer and Parasite coming up next. So yeah, cheers, you guys, and we'll see you on the other side.